Our topic for this session, as I mentioned earlier, is the competitive advantage of family businesses. Absolutely delighted that we have Gaurav Dalmia joining us from New Delhi. It's late in the day for Gaurav, but he has been very gracious to make time for us. Gaurav is part of the Dalmia family, which is another of the large family groups in India. And he has focused on the financial services industry with investing, private equity, real estate, and so on. And so he not only does he work in a family business, he also has a window into Indian family companies in his role as a private equity investor. He has an MBA from Columbia Business School, but he's also, in some ways, a closet academic, I feel, because Gaurav, you've written periodically in many publications, and you have a curiosity that rivals that of many academics. So it's a great pleasure to have you. Before we dive into any questions, let me say I've got J. Narayanan, our faculty professor of Management Organization Development, who will be joining me in starting the conversation with Gaurav. And as we did in the previous session, we'll have time for questions from the audience. So please start thinking about your questions so that at the end, when we open it up to questions from the floor, you can jump right in. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Gaurav and say, Gaurav, welcome again. And maybe you'll have a few things you'd like to say before we get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Ravi, thank you for the kind introduction. I think I would like to open by just making a few comments, if I may. And, you know, there's a saying, if you can succeed for 3 generations, you create an empire. If you succeed for 5 generations, you can create a dynasty. So the endeavor for many family businesses is, can you run a successful business for 3 or more generations where you can create an empire or a dynasty? And empirical evidence does suggest that many family businesses in generation 3, generation 4, and 5 wither away because of lack of interest from successive generations and so on. And that's a constant fight in family businesses, how to keep the family business thriving. The second comment I would make is I would quote Warren Buffett. He was asked, you know, your formula seems so simple. Why can't people copy it? And his reply was, well, people can't copy it because no one wants to get rich slow. Everyone wants to get rich fast. Now, in the Indian context, what that may mean is, let's look at what our GDP growth is and let's translate it into wealth creation. So if you read reported numbers, India's GDP growth is 6.5%. Let's assume that's a running number for 10 years. That's real GDP growth. If you were to translate it as to what it feels like to me as an Indian business, it feels like 10% growth, which is the nominal GDP growth. So we experience nominal GDP growth on the ground. So if I have a world where it's 10% nominal GDP growth, earnings of revenues of businesses should grow at a roughly 10% as well for India to have 10% nominal GDP. If corporate India's revenues are growing at about 10% and there's some operating leverage in the business, our profits should grow at 13, 14%. If our profits grow at 12, 13, 14%, our wealth should grow at 12, 13, 14% as well, which means a family business, listed or private, can double its wealth every 6 to 7 years. So in India, getting rich slow and just playing on the economy means doubling your wealth every 6 to 7 years, which is actually a great place to be. And many businesses try to do much faster. They do it by taking leverage, which is why they have troubles once in a while. They do it by entering new businesses where they may or may not have core competence and they have trouble once in a while. And those are the things that hold people back. But businesses which have focused on their core and just followed the mega trend of economic growth in India have actually done very well, which is why you will see, if you see the Indian billionaire list or whatever, you will see people, a lot of people from the old economy. because of this growth. They'll be in auto parts, they'll be in cement, they'll be in steel. So we're in that phase where wealth creation is fairly diverse in India. It's not concentrated in a few sectors. So Ravi, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Jay, do you want to?
So we had a call before this, and Gaurav had an interesting point of view on this. So I really wanted to talk to you about that challenge that you mentioned about keeping the next generation interested, so that it becomes a dynasty. 5 generations, as you put it. I really like that framing. So how do you do that? Farhad alluded to that a little bit, like that dinner table conversations are about partnerships, and so how do you, what examples have you seen of that being done successfully versus what are things that families do that keep that happening with next generation?
See, if you look at family businesses in different generations, there are different drivers. So the founding generation is innately good, which is why they leave a job and they start a business, or they move from one business to another and try and create large businesses. The challenges start in generation 2, 3, 4, and so on. A friend of mine used to be CEO of Deutsche Bank globally. His name was Anshu Jain. And I remember in the 90s, he told me, he said, Gaurav, the problem for you, which means my generation of business people, he said, the problem for you is you can underperform to your potential and still have a very good life, which is not true for someone at that time like Anshu Jain. So he said, I can't do that, but you can, which is why you make trade-offs very differently than other people. And that kind of stuck in my mind. And I said, how do I make trade-offs like Anshu Jain rather than an inheritor of a family business? So I think that's one mindset you need to inculcate in families. Now, what drives you? You could be driven by achievement. You could be driven by being rich. So there are multiple complex factors that can drive you. Our own focus in our family is you should be driven by achievement, by being worthy, not just by being rich. Wealth is a corollary of these other things. It's not an end in itself. So that's something we try and inculcate in future generations. Certainly in my generation, that was true. Now, Bill Gates says, you should give your kids enough money. So they have an option of doing whatever they want. But not doing anything is not an option. Which means if you want to be NGO type, you can be an NGO type. If you want to be a playwright, you can be a playwright. If you want to go into the tech business, you should be able to go into the tech business. But you can't be a beach bum. Right? So that's another criteria we use in our own family, and I've seen that many other successful families use that as well. The other thing we try to do is help our own family members, and I did it when I was younger, my kids did it, is discover your own pluses and minuses. So for instance, when you graduate from college, it's almost an unwritten rule that you should work outside the family business, where you learn team dynamics, because in a family business, learning team dynamics is much tougher. You learn about your own strengths and weaknesses. So in my case, I have 3 kids. I have a daughter, and then I have twins, boy and girl. They all worked after graduation in a standard 2-year analyst program in consulting. Okay, it gives you a broad perspective about the world. So one worked at McKinsey, one at Bain, and one at BCG. So I have a lot of advice coming through.
Wow.
But I think that helps young people who are entering a family business to know exactly what they want to do and why they want to do it. And they learn team dynamics much more outside than they would do inside. Parents tend to think of their kids as being very smart, but they don't grade kids on a curve. They just say, oh, my son is very smart. Right? In the real world, you're rewarded for not just being very smart, but for being in the top quartile or the top decile. So I keep challenging my kids, at least, and I've seen other families who will challenge younger generations to say, look, you have to truly achieve. You can't be satisfied because you just have you're just going steady and you're just moving with momentum. And you have to avoid the golden handcuff. A lot of kids, a lot of younger generation people join the family business because it serves as a kind of golden handcuff, which is not a very good idea. So those are the kind of things we've seen people do. We've tried to consciously do it. And I do think that helps build future generations.
Yeah, Gaurav, if I can just follow up on you made many references to your family. And one of the interesting things that you've also written about, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, is you belong to the Marwari community. And that is a relatively small community in the Indian setup, but a disproportionate role in terms of entrepreneurship and success in business. So what is the recipe of the Marwari community or the culture, subculture, that you think explains this very, very amazing role in the Indian economy?
You see, if we just go back into history, Marwadis dominated trade. And trade is also a financing business. So therefore, they dominated parts of the financing business. And I would say if you were to pick two quote-unquote tribes, Marwadis and Gujaratis would have been the traditional traders and businessmen in India. I have a friend who's a Marwari, and his first job was at Reliance, at Jio. And he jokes, he says, I was born a Marwari, trained by a Gujarati, I know everything I need to know. Now, if you see, Marwadis came from semi-arid community in Rajasthan. So they turned adversity, what would have been adversity, into an opportunity by going into trading. They couldn't grow anything. They were not an agrarian society per se, but they were very good traders as is. And if you see in deep parts of India, if you go into Northeast India today, you will find Marwadis there. If you saw, as the British Empire came and new trade routes opened up, the Marwadis went there. Before that, when the kingdoms were there, the Marwadis were prominent traders with the royal families in those kingdoms. So they were very versatile, they adapted, they moved geographically, and so on. And, in the old days, Calcutta was full of Marwadis. Bombay became a hub for Marwadis. And to me, the Marwadis represent the immigrant culture, which you will see in the US, you will see it with other communities. They represent that. So Amy Chua, who's a Yale academic, wrote a very good piece called The Triple Package. The triple package is for successful immigrants. What drives them to be successful in the United States? And that was a sense of superiority, that I'm very good, I'm well educated, I can do it. A sense of insecurity, that I've come to the United States, I need to prove myself. And impulse control. Their savings rates would be higher, and so on. And I would say the same traits that makes immigrants succeed in the US made Marwadis succeed in India. There is a story in the Mahabharata where the guru, Dronacharya, is asking his students that there is a fish on a wheel up there, and the wheel is rotating. You have to look at a pot of water on the ground, and you have to hit the eye of the fish with an arrow. So he asked his first student, whether it was Duryodhana or Yudhishthira or whoever it was, and he said, what do you see? He says, I see a fish, I see a rotating wheel, I see the sky. And everybody described it as such until they came to Arjun. And he asked Arjun. Arjun is peeping into the bowl of water, and there's the rotating wheel. And they ask Arjun, Arjun says, I see the fish of the eye, because that's what his focus was. He wasn't interested in the birds flying around. He wasn't interested in the wheel. He was interested in that eye. So I think Marwadis or successful immigrants are very well focused. And if you look at the Palestinian Lebanese community in the Middle East, which dominated the Middle East for a long time, I would argue they would have similar traits. If you look at the trust networks of the Bangladeshi community who run the restaurant and the wholesale trade in London. It will be very similar. So I don't know how many people in the audience know, most of the Indian restaurants in London are actually run by Bangladeshis. And not only are they just Bangladeshis, they're Bangladeshis from one district. They are part of trust networks where they would get credit, where an outsider, so-called, will not get credit. So they are successful, immensely successful in the restaurant business. So Marwadis have leveraged that kind of trust networks within themselves. And the Marwari saying is, money is far more exciting than anything it buys. So they are not spendthrifts, they are achievers.
But they have high impulse control too. They don't spend it.
Yeah, Jay?
No, I mean, I'm just reminded of David McClelland's work where he looked at the qualities of leaders and he put exactly the same things you did, which is the high need for achievement, but combined with, he called it inhibition, which is essentially what you said, which is self-control. That's kind of delaying the marshmallow, like, waiting for the 2 marshmallows when the experimenter is away, the famous studies that Walter Mischel did in the 1960s. So I was really struck by your example of the focus, this razor sharp focus. So I can see, again, I'm so interested in this intergenerational transfer of that focus, right? Like, and your reference to Anshu Jain, who said you will not have the same kind of focus that's your liability almost. The fact that your father had that, but you don't have to worry about that kind of focus. How do you, just hearing that, it seems like that shook something in you. How did that, how do you do that for your next generation? I mean, because they have even less of, the fire in the belly that you did, right? Like, because you really saw directly the father's struggle. But, what happens to your children? So how do you keep that sort of focus on the eye, on the wheel for your children?
Like I was saying earlier, it is by focusing on achievement rather than wealth. It is by focusing on discovering your own strengths and weaknesses. One way to do it is by working outside the family business and proving yourself. Learning teamwork, I think that's the singular most important factor for long-term success. Can you build and manage a good team, irrespective of the sector you're in? So those are the kind of things you just learn on the job. You learn through trial and error. And we would force our future generations to go through that kind of trial and error, go through that kind of baptism by fire, and learn. And I can tell you, people in my family, they've done very well. I look at future generations and they're doing extraordinarily well. They're very talented. I can give you an example. I have a nephew who turned 40 last year. And I sent his mother a graph. I said, when he came into business, the business was making, he runs a soda ash business. It was making X amount of money. I can't remember how much that was. And on his 40th birthday, he was making $150 million in profit after tax. And I said, look, your kid's done it. So he said, please send it to my son as well. So I sent it to my nephew. So kids are doing well.
So, yeah, I think we'll open it up for questions from the audience at this point. A question from Sheila Puffer, Professor Sheila Puffer. Yep, the mic is on its way. Wait, just.
International business.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comments. What role does the informal economy play in family business? I would think that constitutes a large portion of the Indian economy. And how is that measured? How do you look at it as an investor?
We need to define what the informal economy is. So in India, we divide the economy into two, roughly. We call it the organized sector and the disorganized sector. And if you've seen industry after industry, the organized sector is gaining share over the disorganized sector, which means industry after industry is consolidating. So if you're a family business and you're in the so-called unorganized sector, which means you're smaller on the smaller side, you've got to figure out a way how you will quickly rise up that curve in your sector and become the organized sector, or you will lose share, you will lose margins, you will lose maybe the risk of even losing your business. Now, there's an interesting study by the way, and they broke up Indian companies by profitability, top decile, second decile, and so on. And they found that the second decile companies were actually growing fastest, not the first decile companies. And there were two counter trends at play here. The first trend was the top decile profit companies were big companies, and the entrepreneurial spirit had sort of waned, which is why they were not growing as fast as the second decile companies. The third decile companies onwards, in terms of profitability, the challenge was they did not have strong enough managements to grow as fast as the second decile companies. And the saying in business is, you're as good as your middle management. So the third decile companies found that even though they had opportunities in front of them, the internal processes, management teams were not strong enough. And I would say, broadly, the middle management was not agile enough to be able to grow their profits as fast as the second decile company. So that's the comment I can make. And this is roughly happening, I can see it across industries. It's like a Schumpeterian shock, and the next 15 years, the winners and losers will get decided.
Thank you. Yeah, a question in the front here from a student. Just tell us which program you're in.
Hi, sir. I'm Arya Shah. I'm an undergraduate student here at Northeastern. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments. My question was, as a prospective next generation myself, you already spoke about maybe exploring outside the family business and exploring opportunities beyond to find your pros, your cons, and your areas of strength. But if you could speak more to how a next generation does find their value add in a business that's continued in a similar fashion or continued in a similar line of conducting and line of working, and how a next generation can work towards finding their own value add and work towards creating a space or creating a niche for themselves to contribute to that lineage or to that line of.
You know, there can be several ways. There's no magic formula. So, for instance, you could go into your family business, and let's assume you make carpets. Okay, I'm just making this up. You could say, look, there's an export market to be harnessed. We haven't done that traditionally. I will do that. Or I've been a contract manufacturer of carpets, and I do think there is a B2C play here. I can take this business and create a brand. So you take your core strength, which is in this case carpet making, and you can expand the market, you can expand the value added through branding, and the various things that as a status quo business, that business is not doing, but if energized properly, which you as a new generation leader can do, you could make it happen. So that might be one example. I'll give you an example of a person who I shall not name, he's a multi-billionaire, runs a large listed company. His son graduates from Harvard Business School a few years ago and shows up in the business. And he tells his dad, Dad, you built a great business. But if I were to do metrics of efficiency, this business is not as efficient as it ought to be. And the father says, yeah, son, you're right. We've been so focused on growth in the last 15 years that we've neglected the efficiency parameters. So come and help me build what has been my blind spot. You know, and this is I think, $6 or $7 billion market cap company. So there are various ways you can go and help your family business grow or start a new business. So look at what the Dabur family is doing. The Dabur family is using its net worth and its liquidity to fund new businesses. So they went out and acquired the Eveready battery business. They've recently acquired a non-bank financial company. So there's a lot called Religate. So they're doing a lot of stuff outside their core business, driven by the passions and opportunities of family members.
Thank you.
Larry Ellison, by the way, is doing the same with his son in the entertainment industry. So, there are several opportunities for family members. You don't have to accept the status quo.
Over there?
Hello. Hi, Gaurav. This is Akanksha. I'm from Mumbai and a student at Northeastern University pursuing my master's. First of all, thank you so much for your time and comments. My question was regarding the earlier discussion which was happening regarding the problems faced by second and third generation of the family business. So, as we know and hear about a lot of difference of opinions because obviously of the generation gap between first and the second or third generation people, which can be regarding the business or strategy or finances or investments. So with respect to that, I would like to understand, in that case, how do you guys generally come on common opinion or decide, or let's say worst case scenario, there is no common grounds you can put upon with the second and third generation people. In that case, how do you take the decisions and what basis do you take them into consideration?
First of all, you've got to have a very open system of dialogue. Family businesses tend to be more hierarchical than the ordinary. Okay. And it's not just between a father and son or father and nephew. It's also between the CEO and the CFO, for example. I'm assuming the CEO is a family member, the CFO is a professional. So you've got to have very serious dialogues about key issues. So let me give you an example. Son comes into the business. Again, I'm giving you a hypothetical example. Son comes into the business and he says, Dad, you're rewarding loyalty more than meritocracy. We need to become more meritocratic. The father says, son, what you're saying is MBA talk. I think loyalty works. We built this business with loyalty. This guy has been working with us for 25 years. He may not be A plus, but he's A minus. It's not a big deal. And let's just stay with it. Don't bother. Right? So that may be a real dialogue. But you've got to be able to work out how, in a new evolving world, whether that A minus head of marketing or head of finance or head of whatever is suitable enough for the business. And typically, the older you get, the CEO of a company will have more blind spots than this young kid who's coming into the business. Typically, that's true. So, I don't know what that, in business school, we studied this formula where it says, if you're changing the strategy of your business, it was called the 5G model or something. Okay. You just can't change the strategy of the business. You've got to change the organizational structure a little bit. You've got to change the kind of people you hire a little bit. You've got to change the decision-making processes a little bit. Only then will your new strategy succeed. So you've got to have an open mind and discuss that. And a time comes where I will say, look, end of dialogue. This is the way we are going to do it. Okay. But it's an open and debated conversation. It's not just a diktat from the top. Similarly, a time will come where you will tell your child, like, look, you're 35 years old. You've been in this business for 10 years. I disagree with what you're doing, but since you think that's the best way to do it, and you are closer to certain things than I am in terms of having opinions or data, we'll do it your way, even though I disagree, and I'll support you fully. So both these things have to work. In certain things, the older generation will prevail. In certain things, the younger generation will prevail. And over time, more and more, the younger generation will prevail. So if you look at, many families, they've created completely new industries. They've created completely new businesses. Legend is that Mukesh Ambani's daughter, Isha, was at home over the summer and she said, Dad, our internet sucks. Let's do telecom. And this is just a joke. But she had a view how telecom could work, which, sitting in a petrochemical business, Mukesh Ambani was thinking about it, but not doing much. And Mukesh Ambani often jokes that triggered him to think even more. And they created Jio thereafter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Pranav Manek. I'm the faculty at the Boston University and also the director of the Parin Furniture Limited, basically from the Gujarat, India. And to be honest, I'm also coming from the desert, very remote area of the Gujarat, where we found a lot of difficulties while growing anything. We don't have classrooms over there, and we are coming from the so much struggle, and that make us to make a very strong person. And to be honest, I want to ask the main question regarding how the family core values help us to grow and to compete with the future immigrating different markets across the globally.
See, I think one advantage family businesses have over other businesses is they think long term. So they can invest in developing a new market for longer than another business, which is not family owned, does, because they may have quarterly pressures and so on and so forth. Secondly, I do believe that success is a function of drive. We all have the same knowledge. The difference between a successful company's knowledge base and a not so successful company's knowledge base is marginal. The difference is, can you make it happen? So if you've identified a new market, as in the example you were giving, I think a family business, if it focuses on it, can iterate, learn, succeed. It may not succeed on day one, but eventually it will succeed. So I do think that's an advantage. And that is why these second decile companies are growing much faster than the first decile companies, because they're typically family businesses.
Gaurav, if you could just do a quick follow-up. You mentioned that family businesses, one of their strengths is that they think long-term. And I'd like you to comment on whether Indian companies that are family-owned are investing in technology, in technological catch-up, and have the ambition to be world-class and not just the best in India, but have global aspirations. And I'm thinking specifically here of the Chinese model, where so many of their companies have not been content just winning in the Chinese market, not just mastering the technology they absorbed from somebody else, but then moving that technology to the global frontier and sometimes even overtaking their masters who taught them those technologies. That spirit or ambition seems to be not as strong in the Indian case, for me, as an outsider. Can you comment on whether this impression is valid and whether there's any difference? Can we rely and expect and hope that maybe the family-owned companies in India will, because they can think long-term, will help India catch up or even get to the frontiers of technology?
For a moment, I suggest we take family businesses out of this equation and just look at Indian businesses compared to US or Chinese businesses. So if you look at US businesses, their R&D as a percentage of revenue is in the range of 5%. That's true for most of EU, that's true for Germany. China is about 2%. India is less than 1%. Okay. No, much less than 1%.
Much less than.
I don't remember. Much less than 1%. So there is a classic problem where Indian companies' R&D as a percentage of revenues is an outlier on the low side. Okay. And that needs to change, whether you're a family business or you are a large listed, professionally managed company, it doesn't matter. But I think as new industries are gaining share, so I'll give an example today. If you read today's Economic Times, it says that electronics exports has become the third largest category of exports. Okay, so it's behind engineering and petroleum products. And then it's electronics. Earlier, pharmaceutical and chemicals were also higher. Okay. Now, as electronics as an industry becomes larger, and Dixon is a family-owned business, which is one of the largest contract manufacturers in India today. R&D as a percentage of revenues is bound to go up because of those sectors growing fast. And I would imagine as family businesses go into newer areas, right, this is bound to happen. There was a speech by the Prime Minister a few weeks ago, and he articulated how India had built a totally indigenous 4G network. Now that's based on Indian R&D. Now whether that Indian R&D resided in 40 different companies doing 40 different things and came together to build a indigenous network, I don't know. But the fact is, India could. 15 years ago, India would not even have tried to do that. So I think that trend is changing within family businesses and outside. So it's a healthy trend.
Got it. Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question. Yeah. Professor Robertson, Professor of International Business, will ask the next question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Chris Robertson, a professor of international business. And my question is for the younger people who are entering family businesses and they're part of the family. How can they earn the respect of their coworkers where their coworkers probably see them under a different light, as if they, are anointed or on a golden path to the top? So how can they overcome that stigma?
Good question.
I would say there's no magic formula, but think of, I give you an example why young members of family businesses should work outside the family business to firstly learn themselves and understand themselves better, and to understand teamwork and team dynamics and so on. Now, just like think of my daughter working at McKinsey, and she thinks she's the smartest person in the room until she shows up at McKinsey and she finds out she's nowhere near the smartest person in the room, and you have a point of view that you have to now carry the rest of the team. And you're in a family business situation where there's somebody who's 10, 12 years older than you in middle management or senior management, and you're this young 22, 24-year-old with some wild idea. And it's no different that you have to show this person who's 10, 12 years older than you to respect your perspective, because you can support and defend your perspective, just like you would have done it in your McKinsey team. So if you have the patience and the wherewithal to do that at McKinsey, there's no reason why you shouldn't have the patience and wherewithal to do it in a family business, simply because you are a part of the lucky sperm club. And that's a discipline that family members need to inculcate in future generations, that you've got to carry the team. And it's difficult. It's not easy. And it has to be done consciously. It won't happen just by saying it'll happen. And I've seen many companies where this kind of conflict happens. When newer generations come in, a lot of people in senior management are agitated. And it requires 2 or 3 years of working together. It doesn't happen overnight. And by the way, that's a part of any transition. Think of a new CEO coming in, of a new president of a division, or a new outside head of sales coming into any business. He has to earn the respect of his team. So this is somewhat different, but not that different.
I think as a corollary, maybe many of them here are not parts of a family business. They probably they're considering whether to work for a family business versus a startup or another traditional MNC. So what is your pitch for young people looking at family business as a potential employer? What can they offer that a traditional firm may not be able to offer?
See, I think the family business can offer you, firstly, a longer term. They can make bets that larger companies can't. Because they don't have the pressures of a listed company, or the pressures of quarterly earnings, or the pressures of navigating every decision through multiple layers. Your decision making can therefore be faster. Second, if you do well, you can rise faster in a family business. Okay. Because there are fewer people, it's a smaller business, you can ride fast. And getting to profit center head in a family business would be a faster track than getting to profit center head in a larger company. Third, in a startup or in a family business, what you won't learn at Procter & Gamble or Goldman Sachs. And likewise, what you learn at a Procter & Gamble or Goldman Sachs, you won't learn in a startup or a family business. So they're different kind of animals, So I would say in a family business, you will learn profit center management. you will become more versatile, and so on.
As a, as a final question, if I can just ask you for any tips you might have, if I'm a company entering in India or another emerging market and I have to negotiate with a family-owned company, is there a difference between negotiating a deal, a joint venture, or something like that, or with a family company as opposed to a non-family company? I mean, I can imagine the family owner sitting and like the owner of the dealership who talks to you after you've already cut a deal and then pushes you harder for even more concessions in the final round of negotiations. Has anything like that happened when negotiating with family companies?
If you take a systematic view of it, I don't think so, because there'll be variations within family businesses. There'll be variations within non-family businesses. But I would say you will find family businesses are more decisive. They may be faster. If a decision is made, it'll probably stick, because let's take a multinational, it'll need board approval, etc., etc. After your deal is done, they go to the board points out 4 different things. In a family business, that's not likely to happen. And capital allocation is made by probably the same person who's negotiating with you. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it may be easier to deal with a family business or an entrepreneur than a large company. So it may not just be family business, a founder-run company, which typically family businesses are. So you may find those strengths.
But multinationals, when they negotiate with a joint venture with a family-owned company, is it fair to say that if it doesn't work out, extricating yourself from that joint venture can be much harder if you're dealing with a family owner, because there's a hold-up situation. They can hold you up and not let you get out without extracting some kind of a premium. Is that a phenomenon you observe, or is that not true?
And not systematically, but I can understand that may happen sometimes. But I don't think that's a systematic problem.
Okay. Well, Gaurav, it's been a delight. Our time is up, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I know it's late in the day for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.